Good morning, Mike. Welcome into the program.
Hey, how's it going, Gary? Roll Tide, man.
Yeah, man. Let's start with your initial thoughts, and you may have predicted it. You're over there in Atlanta, like I said. You got your pulse on those Georgia Bulldogs, and boy, I know they're full of themselves. And you've been calling it since the summer. I mean, you said, "Hey, man, Georgia's going to be the real deal." What were your thoughts, or did you expect Georgia to be number one over Alabama in the first college football playoff rankings?
I didn't expect it. I'm not upset about it. I think when you line up the two teams next to each other, the fact of the matter is that the Florida State win for Alabama just doesn't look like the Notre Dame win for Georgia right now. Notre Dame has built their own resume and have had some quality wins here as the football season's progressed. So I hate hindsighting schedules, and I hate looking back at Alabama's schedule and saying, well, it's a weak schedule because, obviously their head was in the right place. But right now I'm okay with us sitting number two. I think that, as the season progresses and as these next few games start to play out, we have 3 top 25 teams left on the schedule and possibly Georgia at the end of the year. So I know some Alabama fans were upset about it. I know some that were actually happy about it and feel like Nick Saban could use it as leverage. But, there's so many games left to play right now. I'm going to save judgment until the end of the year.
Oh, I'm with you. It doesn't bother me. In fact, I think, as you alluded to, it's probably good for Alabama. I'll tell you my only question, and I guess we just don't know, is how the committee's doing this. Is it about your schedule? Is it about who you think the best team is? Because I got to tell you, they're two different questions to me. I'll give you this. Georgia's win over Notre Dame, although listen to people talk now, you think they went into Lambeau Field and beat the Packers the year they won the Super Bowl with Aaron Rodgers. I mean, they've gotten more mileage out of this win over Notre Dame, which at the time, I didn't think it was a great win. Now, Notre Dame's turned out to be better than what I thought they were, but man, you think Georgia had slayed the giant here. But here's the thing. If you're looking at it, in my opinion, from who's the best team, clearly, to this point, they've been number one all season long. They've vanquished everybody. Alabama's the best team. I got no problem with Georgia being ahead of them. But, again, I think it sends mixed messages to some degree in the way that they're putting these rankings out there. If I were a Georgia fan, I'd be, I know they're flattered, and, hey, we've already Kirby in his second year. He's already better than Saban. I can hear him over there now. But now you got the bullseye on you, brother. And I tell you one thing about Georgia. You better be ready to lace them up tight on Saturday against South Carolina. Because, I mean, as Alabama, as you know, Mike, having been in this program, when you get to the top and you got that bullseye on you, everything is different. I'll be interested to see how Georgia handles it. I really will.
Yeah, I am too. And I think that obviously Kirby Smart's background with Alabama, gives him a little bit of insight into how to handle a situation like this. But, my co-host, Brandon Adams, he's from Dog Nation, and he brought the question up to me, does it really change things to play as the number one team? And I gave him the example of Alabama going into, play between the hedges in 2015. The whole Georgia team is sitting there barking at Alabama. Yeah. I'm like, tell me when you've seen Georgia do that before. That's what the number one team gives you. You show up in the stadium, the other team comes and greets you at the tunnel, and the fans are raucous. And, it's a completely different element to have that target on your back. And I'm with you when you look at the poll, when you look at the College Football Playoff Committee. I think they've almost set themselves up. I think they understand that, having two teams at the top right now that are from the same conference, probably won't damage them much in the end, because in the end, those two teams will have to play and they'll have to make decisions based on, how those two teams finish the schedule. But, when you round out things and you start looking at the Pac-12 possibly being left out, you start looking at Oklahoma having an uphill climb as well. The College Football Playoff Committee's got some tough decisions ahead of them. As like I said, I think they got it right for here. I think they got it right for right now for October 31st. But, they're going to have some tougher decisions as Alabama's schedule continues to pan out.
Well, it's fun. There's no doubt about it. And you played for the man. You know him well. I get tickled at Coach Saban, and we're going to play his comments about being asked about the rankings yesterday. He said, well, I didn't even know we were ranked number 2 till a little while ago, which you and I both know is hogwash. He may not watch the show, but he knew immediately. But he's so fun to listen to. I've got to where I love it. How does he come up? I know he probably goes through in his head, Mike, but since you played for him, I want to ask you this question. He probably goes through in his head and has an idea of what he's going to be asked. But how in the heck does he come up with these analogies off the cuff? Like yesterday, somehow after being asked about being number 2, he tied it into where you're climbing a mountain, you're 2/3 up, you're standing on a slippery slope, you look up and you see an airplane overhead, and you lose track of where you're at, and you slip and fall and bust your butt. How? I mean, yeah. Where does he come up with these stories, man?
I really don't know. I thought one of the most interesting things that I've been able to do, and you were able to do it this year as well, and then a lot of times in the past, sitting there, hosting that Nick Saban show on Thursday night, you sit there and look at his notes. He has all these notes written down in this notepad that he brings in with him, and he's scribbling things off, and he's writing things down, and he's adding to them, and he's taking them away. And it's just a small, being able to sit there, and I know you've enjoyed that as well, it's just small insight into what his mind is. I mean, it's always working. It's always looking for a metaphor. It's always looking for another way to deliver a message. And he is a very good public speaker, and he is very good in the way he delivers not only his message to the media, but also to the players and to the fans. And, it's just one of the unique qualities that makes him one of the greatest coaches of all time. I don't know that there is a specific formula for what he does, but he has a way of almost putting football games into poetry. I mean, he really does. You can kind of amount what he says throughout the year and looking at the schedule to something you'd read in a book. And, I thought it was a great analogy. I thought it was a great metaphor, climbing the mountain and slipping and falling off. And he's right. You can be the toast of the town one week and lose this week to LSU, and, you're right back down at the bottom next week. So you got to continue to do the same things. And, obviously he's done a good job so far this year of relaying that message to his players.
Let me ask you this, Mike, because, again, he says he doesn't watch TV and he doesn't read the paper. And again, I think he does some. I think if he doesn't, he's probably got somebody who's, every aspect of his organization has someone that's in charge of something. I bet he's got someone in charge of letting him know exactly what's being said and written about Alabama. But he says he's not concerned about being number 2. And I think, that's true. I don't think he cares, just for the reasons that you said. If Alabama takes care of business, it doesn't matter. But in terms of using it as motivation, here's where I'm going with this, kind of like we've alluded to already. Do you think he gets with the team and he says, listen, man, you've been doing this for years. You've done year after year. You've beat everybody this year handily, and all of a sudden Georgia has one good year, and they're they're ahead of you. I mean, how much disrespect is that? How much more can you be disrespected? Do you think he uses that as motivation with his team when the cameras aren't on?
I actually don't. I actually don't think specifically right now that he would bring up Georgia or that he would bring up anybody other than LSU. I think that, possibly when you start looking at, the next 3 SEC teams we play that are ranked, and obviously Auburn and LSU, Mississippi State are all going to be tough tasks, but I don't see that as being part of Nick's repertoire when he approaches the team. I think that, anything that points to the fact that you're not game planning for LSU and Darius Geis and Arden Key and Danny Etling is a message that he's probably not going to deliver. Once you get down that schedule, and if you are able to kind of complete this regular season and possibly get to Georgia and Atlanta, then I definitely think it would be brought up. I think that it would be brought up by not only him, but more importantly, Scott Cochran on a day-to-day basis in the weight room, going through stretches, things like that. I don't know that Nick Saban will address the team with it just yet, but you know what? More so than ever, these players are also paying attention to social media and to ESPN and to newspapers. So they know that it's out there. They know, the respect level that they feel like they deserve. And maybe possibly for some of those guys, it's not there right now.
All right, let's talk about the Alabama-LSU game a little bit. And I know you former players look at it differently when you break it down, when you're watching tape. I said this earlier on the air. I said it on my television programs. I think everything LSU's done from hiring Les Miles going forward is designed with an idea of trying to beat Alabama, from hiring the offensive coordinator to, hiring Coach O in the first place because of his recruiting ties to Louisiana, so forth and so on. But when you look at this game as a former player looking at the tape, is there anything that you've seen that would indicate to you that LSU has any possibility of coming in here and having a chance to win this football game?
Well, yeah, for sure. I mean, I think when you look at their pass defense, when you look at their secondary, when you look at both of those safeties, Grant Delpit, John Battle, they've been pretty good this year against the pass. They've got some young pass rushers up front. Arden Key's starting to get healthy. Christian Locouture is starting to kind of wreak havoc in the backfield and wearing that number 18 jersey. They do have some pieces, especially defensively. And I think Dave Aranda has been in this circumstance enough to know kind of how to defend Alabama's offense, and Jalen Hurts, and did a pretty good job of it last year. I think where the struggle comes in for them really is when you talk about their offensive line, when you talk about the freshmen they've been forced to play. I mean, I think they had 5 or 6 linemen leave that program this past season through transfer or just leaving football. And now all of a sudden, KJ Malone, Carl Jr. is, injured this week and hasn't practiced. So when you look at their offensive front, they've been successful in the running game, but I think if Alabama catches them in 3rd and long, I think that's really where the difference kind of comes into play. But, as long as their defense is still playing at a high level and they can kind of stack the box with 8 guys and go man-to-man in our wide receivers, it's going to be a tough task for our offense. It's going to be interesting to see how Brian Dable and Jalen Hurts respond this weekend with how they offensively game plan for LSU. And so I definitely see a path there. I mean, they have the players, they have the athletes. I don't know that they have the depth like they have in years past, and I think maybe that's what the difference is when you look at the game this weekend.
Well, how do you think that Dable and Hurts will respond? Because the one thing about LSU, and they've been really good, and this year maybe not quite to the same level they've been, but it seems to me that because of the nature of these games, and because so much has been on the line, and because of how good LSU's been, that Alabama always plays a little more conservative or close to the vest offensively when they play against LSU. Do you think that will continue, or do you think maybe they'll try to open it up a little more this year?
No, I think it'll definitely continue, and here's the reason why, Gary, is because it's what you have on the other offensive sideline. When you look at what LSU has been able to do offensively against Alabama here in the last 10 years, I mean, it doesn't really match up with anybody else. They haven't done much offensively. So I think when you look at that, and look at LSU's struggles and look at their inability to kind of get in the end zone a lot of times against Alabama or get their running game going, that forces you to play conservatively on offense. You sit there and look at it last year, and you probably think to yourself, the only way that LSU can climb in that game against Alabama's defense is if Jalen Hurts has a bunch of turnovers and throws interceptions and does have fumbles. And he did have a couple last year, didn't play that well. So when you start breaking down this year as a game plan, I'm not sure what they're going to do. I know they're going to have a ton of misdirection in. I know that LSU is going to stack the box, and Alabama's still going to try to run the ball. You're going to have some of those option plays, some of those swing routes. I'd like to see a little bit of the intermediate passing game, some of those tight ends going up the hash. But, I can tell you that when we approach this game, even when teams did stack the box, Joe Pender used to always tell us they can't fit 8 guys in one gap, and we're going to attack that one gap, and that's where we're going to get our yards. I wouldn't be surprised if Brian Dable and company try to do that, at least with the running backs this weekend, and then possibly, Jalen pulling it out and scrambling for some yards as well. But I really do. I think it's going to be a conservative game plan. I don't think you're going to see anything crazy, possibly like you're going to see out of Matt Canada on the opposing sideline. I think right now, all you have to worry about, when you approach this weekend's game plan is Jalen Hurts not turning the ball over. I think that'll be first and foremost.
All right, I want to get you to expand on South Carolina, Georgia, because maybe I'm the only one that views it this way. First of all, I'm very impressed with the job Will Muschamp's done at South Carolina. For them to get it to 6-2, I think is quite an accomplishment. Clearly, Georgia's the better football team. I can see that like everybody else does. But as I said, Georgia now is number 1 in the playoff poll. It's a different kind of vibe for them. Will Muschamp, a Georgia guy, he and Kirby Smart, good friends. But Will Muschamp and South Carolina found a way to win some games. They've got Jay Bentley, who's capable of making some plays on offense. Defensively, they'll battle you. They're tough. Do you think this will be a very competitive game, or do you think Georgia will blow them out?
I think it's going to be closer than most people think. I think when you look at the 24-point line, along with LSU and Alabama's 21.5-point line, then I think that kind of gives you the wrong impression. And, Georgia's going to do some things. They're going to have some success offensively, specifically running the ball. They're just too explosive not to. They've got too many running backs not to. Their offensive line's playing at a very high level right now. But I'm with you. I think Will Muschamp's done a great job. I think the South Carolina defensive line, they're a little bit young and obviously playing some younger players, and he's still continuing to develop and recruit some of those guys on that defensive line position. But Will Muschamp knows defense. He knows how to kind of prepare these guys for what they're going to see, and he has that young defensive line playing at a high level. They've got some talent in the linebacking core and in the secondary. And anytime you have Jake Bentley as your quarterback, and I can't tell you how many times I've said that this offseason, he's a gamer. I mean, he's a guy that's going to go in and try to do the things necessary to win the game. They kind of stumbled a little bit after the Deebo Samuel loss, but they're still a team that can make some noise offensively, and they've come a long way. I think really, it's kind of similar to the way I look at this LSU-Alabama game. When you look at South Carolina's offensive line, I don't know that they have the ability to stand up to what Georgia's going to be able to do with their front seven, with Lorenzo Carter and Davin Bellamy and Roquan Smith and everybody else that they're going to see this weekend from Georgia. So that's really where the nature of it's going to be told. It's going to be interesting to see South Carolina's offensive game plan as well, because you've got to roll Jake Bentley out. You can't leave him in the pocket, but roll him outside the pocket and allow him to use his legs and his arms to possibly win the football game and take some shots downfield. I think it's going to be an interesting one to watch. I don't see South Carolina losing by 24 this weekend.
Mike, let me ask you this, and if you can't, you just tell me, because I need to get to break. Can you hold on for another segment?
Yeah, man. That's
good, because I want to ask you about Auburn and Texas A&M, and in Auburn, I kind of, when I heard Herbstreit say it, I kind of raised an eyebrow, but he's right. If Auburn were to win it out, with who they've got left on their schedule, they could get in the playoffs. So I want to ask you about that. I do want to ask you about all the knocks Alabama's taking for its schedule, and also want to get into a little Falcons talk, particularly since D. Orlando Ledbetter can't be on with me today. So we'll do that. Mike Johnson's going to hang around for extra segment here, and we still got much more college football discussion and the Falcons coming up next here on the Gary Harris Show. You keep it tuned to Tide 102.9, 100.9, Tide1029.com, and the new Tide 1029 app. Mike Johnson here from SEC Country Live. All right, we've been talking about Alabama and Georgia, the rankings. I want to move on to some other subjects, but a couple more. First, getting back to Georgia being ranked number one, Mike, I guess for me, what kind of bugs me a little bit is, again, I'm not sure what formula they're using. Here's the bottom line to me. People say it doesn't matter, and I guess theoretically it doesn't, but in terms of perception, if you put somebody at number one and you put somebody else at number two, to me, you're saying that team at number one you think is better. I don't, well, the schedule's all, bottom line is somebody's one, somebody's two. So I'm going to ask you the question because I don't. And then, if they play, we'll find out. But there's no way in the world I'm putting Georgia ahead of Alabama in any poll this year. Yeah, you think Georgia's better than Alabama?
No, I don't. I think when you start to line them up on the field together, I think it takes on a whole nother meaning. But I don't mind that they put it that way because I think what they're given the opportunity to do is read the resume. I don't know if a lot of the guys sitting in this room are college football coaches, but I don't know that they read the X's and O's probably like other people do. And I think that's what they were put there to do is read the resume. Tell me what this team has done, not what it will do. And like I said, when you put them side by side right now, Georgia's is right there with Alabama. And they have been, beating teams handily and beating teams by an average of, 24, 25 points. So, I understand what you're saying. And I think that once you line the two teams up on the field, Alabama by favored by, 8 or 9 or 10 points. But that's like I said, I think the committee just sets themselves up, to know that later on in the year they won't have to make as tough a choice because those two teams eventually, if they keep going that direction, will match up on the field. And that'll make things a lot easier on the committee in the end.
Okay, the schedule deal, because I'm pretty much sick of this one, Mike, and I don't know how much you talk about it over there on your show in Atlanta. But, listen, people are looking, analysts, talking heads like myself are looking for chinks in Alabama's armor, and this schedule stuff's just gotten ridiculous. They do it every year. You get about 6, 7, 8 games in the season, and they want to pile on. The latest is Joel Klatt saying Alabama's schedule is by far the weakest of any of the top 10 teams, the Fox Sports analysts saying that. Here, to me, is something – I hate the revisionist history because, Mike, you played at this level. To me, it's about where were they when you played them? Because one thing, after Alabama beats the dog snot out of some of these teams, they're never the same, let's be honest. But when Alabama played Florida State, that was a huge game. It wasn't 8 weeks into the season. At the time, Florida State was ranked number 3. They had Francois at quarterback. That was a dangerous game. That was a big game. Alabama won it. When they played Vanderbilt was coming off a win over Kansas State. A good team in the Big 12, and everybody was talking about this Vanderbilt team is for real. Remember, there were a lot of people saying Alabama couldn't score 19 points against Vanderbilt, which was the point spread at the time. So to me, it's about when you play them. Yeah, you can look back at everybody's schedule and nitpick, but one reason these teams falter is because what Alabama does to them, it sets the tone for the rest of their season. Am I out in left field? Am I the only one that views it this way, or do you agree that the schedule's been incredibly weak like most people are saying?
No, I'm with you. It's like I said, last segment, that I hate to hindsight a schedule. I hate to go into a schedule and look back at it and say, oh, well, this win means that, and this one, doesn't mean as much. I would make the argument, too, that, when you look at Florida State, I don't think that they're playing with a ton of passion right now. I don't think that those guys are playing with, like a Florida State team of the past. But had they won against Alabama, I would make the argument that their season might have done a U-turn.
Absolutely.
Maybe you do lose DeAndre Francois, but I still think you're looking at a Florida State team that had possibly won that game, still with maybe only 1 or 2 losses. I think they have enough talent, and had they been the number 1 team in the country after that, probably would have played at a higher level. And so I'm with you. I don't like looking back on it and saying, well, this team didn't get this done the next week. It's just not fair. It's just not fair when you line Alabama up against some of the other schedules around the country that Alabama has done those things for a reason, and they are good enough to kind of get separation between some of those teams. So it's tough, and I understand why some of the people around the country do it. There is a ton of Alabama fatigue, and I think you're going to deal with that as Nick Saban's tenure continues to move on. But there are some good football teams in the SEC, and there's a ton of talent and a lot of future NFL players. And so I think it's going to be interesting to look back on this point right now, a few weeks from now and say, look, we played a number 19 LSU, or we played a number, 18 Mississippi State, or whatever they're ranked right now, and possibly a number 10, number 12 ranked Auburn team, and then possibly Georgia, because you look back on this moment right now, and all those teams are ranked, but I guarantee you when you get to the end of the year, they won't be. And so I hope people start to remember that, that first poll from the committee as we start to go down the schedule.
Yeah, and you're right. This November stretch for Alabama might be as tough as any team in the country. LSU at home Saturday night at Mississippi State. Still have to go to Auburn, and if they get through, navigate that, they'll play Georgia in the SEC championship game there at the end of November, the start of December. So that could be as tough a stretch as anybody faces. I want to ask you about Auburn because when Kirk Herbstreit was propping them up the other night, ranked at 14, and I'm thinking to myself, my gosh, what do they have to do? How many games do they have to lose to be out of the discussion for the national championship playoff? But then the more he said it, the more I agreed with him. And it's a big if, first thing I do is win at A&M on Saturday. But if they were to beat A&M and then beat Georgia and Alabama in back-to-back weeks at home and then beat Georgia again in the SEC championship and 11-2 as an SEC champion, knocking off the two teams that are 1-2 in the first playoff rankings back-to-back in essence, they'd probably be in the playoff. Mike?
Yeah, that's a huge if. And I think that when you look at, and I brought this up on our show a couple of weeks ago, when you look at the ability to be able to make the college playoff, I think you look at it from two different angles. Do they have the ability on the field to be able to do it? Probably not. Do they have the ability to kind of make up for those two losses if they are able to win out? Then absolutely. I think when you look at possibly playing what would be, 3 top 5 games in 4 weeks against top 5 opponents, that definitely kind of gives them a little bit of a pass. But I think Alabama fans should feel really excited about the fact that Georgia is playing Auburn before you. I think that seeing what Kirby Smart and Georgia does when they go to Jordan-Hare Stadium in a couple of weeks is going to be a big deal for Alabama and Nick Saban. They can see how the game planning is going. They can see how the X's and O's match up and how Will Muschamp and everybody over in Auburn right now will try to attack that defense. And so the path is going to be there, but to play, those teams that are so similar, number 1 and 2 teams in the country, and try to, match up against those quality defenses in back-to-back weeks, then possibly play Georgia again, I think it's just too big of a hill to climb. I mean, we can sit here and talk about if and when scenarios, but they've got to start winning and starting with Texas A&M this week, and I think that's a tough task.
You do? You think that'll be a tough game for them?
Yeah, I do. I think when you look at Texas A&M, the things they've been able to do, Kellen Mond's kind of been up and down, but for all the problems that Kevin Sumlin has, I think he's actually a decent coach. When I look at Auburn right now, I don't think they have really any weaknesses as far as position groups go, but the weakness to me lies at kind of the head coach offensive coordinator position. When you look at the second half against LSU, when you look at the second half against Clemson, they didn't have the ability to counterpunch. They didn't have the ability to come up with answers in the second half against those teams. And I think that really therein lies the weakness when you're talking about Auburn football right now. Yes, they've got a good quarterback. Yes, they've got a good running game. Yes, they've got elite young wide receivers. But what are you going to do when you have to make adjustments at halftime? And right now, to me, Gus Malzahn hasn't shown the ability to do that.
All right, I want to ask you about the Falcons, especially since I don't have D. Orlando Ledbetter on today. And listen, you know me well enough to already know. I mean, I have no objectivity when it comes to Julio Jones. Okay, I'm a fan first when it comes to him. So I'm probably not looking at it correctly. Even though you played with him, maybe you can separate yourself from your bias and tell me why I'm not getting it. I know they won the game against the Jets. They got it to 4-3. I still think this team has played poor this year. I think Matt Ryan has not played well. And I'm not buying it. When I keep hearing, well, he's double teamed. He's a great decoy. We can't force the ball. Everybody else forces the ball to their top guy. You going to tell me Roethlisberger doesn't force it to Antonio Brown? They don't draw up plays specifically. Every other top wide receiver in the league catches the frickin' football. Okay, they get him the ball. Julio had 3 catches against the Jets. Now the last one was a huge catch. But I'm looking at this team struggling on offense, and I'm thinking you got the best wide receiver on the league, and you continue not to use him. Can you not hand him the ball on a jet sweep? Can you not run a reverse? Get the ball in his hands and they're underutilizing this guy. 1 touchdown through 7 games is a joke. I'm sick of it. I trade the guy. I mean, let him go play somewhere where they'll get him the football. What's going on?
Yeah, Gary, tell us how you really feel, man. I love it. I love the passion, and I'm with you, and I think a lot of people in Atlanta are with you too when they talk about Julio Jones and they talk about the lack of ability really from Steve Sarkisian and Matt Ryan to get the ball to him. I'm not sure what it is. I think it's a number of factors when you look at how the offense is operating. First of all, they're not running the ball as well as they did last year. I think that takes a little bit of the play action away. The right guard position right now, and obviously with Ryan Trader being out a couple of weeks on the right side of that line, that's also been a little bit of a question mark. And I think that's kind of playing in the back of Matt Ryan's head. You're going to force the ball into double coverage at times to get it to your best playmaker, but not when you don't have time in the backfield. Matt Ryan's not a scrambling quarterback like Ben Roethlisberger, where he can kind of buy time to kind of get rid of those double teams out there for Julio Jones. He's got to be one of those quarterbacks that's in sync and that can, that can do things throughout the matchup that he knows. It's going to be all about timing. It's going to be about throwing to the sideline. It's going to be about hitting a guy when he knows he's going to be open. Matt Ryan just doesn't have that ability to kind of make up things on the run, and I think that's the reason you don't see him getting the ball to Julio as much as a guy like Ben or Aaron Rodgers or some of the other quarterbacks in the league. They have to play ball, to go away from those double teams. They have to hit guys in stride and count on some of those other playmakers like Sanu, like Taylor Gabriel. So as the season progresses, I think you're going to find ways to get Julio the ball, maybe some of those tunnel screens and those passes across the middle. But right now, I don't know if the protection's been there good enough or the running game's been there good enough to allow Matt Ryan the time to get it past double coverage and get it to Julio's hands.
Well, I like what Terry Bradshaw said about Julio. If he's open, throw him the ball, and if he's not open, throw it to him anyway. I mean, I just think you got to give him. And then I read Joe Namath's tweet during the game against the Jets. He said, would have already at this point in the game, I would have thrown the 10 passes to Julio, and that was in the first half. So I'm not the only one that feels that way. But the Falcons did win. They're back over 500, but they've got a huge game because Atlanta now has no margin for error. They're going to have to win these division games. The Saints are off to a great start at Carolina this Sunday. How do you see that game, the Falcons at the Panthers?
Yeah, it's going to be tough. I've watched Panthers play a couple of times this year, and obviously they've had their own issues, but they're sitting there at 5-3. And, that's always a tough game. I think every time you match up Atlanta going to Carolina, and, I saw it a couple of times during my playing career where that's a tough matchup. And, Cam Newton at home and that offense in the years past have been able to kind of bring a physicality, to our defense. We haven't been able to match sometimes. Cam Newton's been able to rip off some huge yardage in games past and do some things with his arms that you probably haven't seen him do in other games. And for that reason, I think it's a tough task. I think obviously Atlanta wants to get their running game back on track, but they've just got to find a way, to try to get in sync. I mean, I think last week you saw, a possible third down conversion sitting there on 3rd and 2, and we throw a screenplay to Devontae Freeman. It wasn't even close to being open.
Right.
And so I think that just leaves you kind of scratching your head. I think we've got to find a way to get in sync again, and whether that be Matt Ryan put more of his thoughts in the playbook or give more of his thoughts to Steve Sarkisian or vice versa. Those guys have to find a way to get the ball in the hands of their playmakers in open space, like you said. I think that's really the key to victory this weekend. Yeah,
I'm with you. And, I like the Panthers right now. And what I've seen of the Falcons, I hope I'm wrong because nobody pulls for the Falcons more than I do. I don't think they're a playoff team right now. I think they're fortunate to be 4-3. All right, let's move on, and because we know we got to wrap this up, but I do want to get your take on the debacle with the Browns and the Bengals and more, the Browns. And I've had a lot of my friends go back and forth. Oh, AJ's so lucky. AJ, I don't see it that way. I mean, there's 32 starting NFL quarterback jobs in the National Football League, period. 32, just like head coaches. It's one of the most exclusive jobs in the world. He's sitting there holding a clipboard for a guy who I think Andy Dalton's not a winner, in my opinion. AJ's 27 years old. He's in his 4th year. He's going to be 28 next September. You've got a limited shelf life, as you know, in the NFL. I wanted to see him get traded to the Browns because I wanted to see him have an opportunity to be a starting quarterback beginning next week. And, it didn't happen because the Browns are inept and pathetic and stupid, and their front office is a joke. And they absolutely blew that by not being able to get it into the NFL. And now AJ is still a backup with the Bengals. So, what was your take on that whole deal?
I got to disagree with you, the fact that I'm okay with him not going to Cleveland. Listen, I think that obviously you want to have the opportunity. You do want to be a starting quarterback, but, if you go to the wrong place and you get the wrong opportunity, ask guys like Johnny Manziel or Brandon Whedon or, you name it. The list is long when you talk about the Cleveland Browns. So I think at some point you have to look the franchise in the mirror, Gary, when you look at what they've been able to do and what their track record is with quarterbacks. It's where quarterbacks go to die. And, I think that if he had been given the opportunity there to be the starting quarterback, that maybe his career lasts, another year or two. But I would much rather see him go somewhere else.
Listen, I hear you, and I know what you're saying, and that's what most people are saying. But again, here's my take. Hugh Jackson was offensive coordinator for 2 years. He knows the system. They are 0-8, but they lost 4 games by 3 points. 4 games by 3 points. So that tells me that with a different quarterback, maybe they're 3-5 or 4-4. Here's why I say this. I don't know how many teams view AJ as a starter, Mike. I just don't. He is in his 4th year. As hard as it is to find quarterbacks, I think more teams view him as a backup than view him as a starter. Now, maybe I'm wrong, and maybe he'll get an opportunity to go somewhere and start next year. But if he was viewed as a legitimate starter, somebody would have already pulled the trigger and made a trade with the Bengals to get him. I just don't know his value on the market, I just don't want to see the guy be a career backup. I'd like to see him get a chance to start. Maybe he will somewhere else. But I know this. Had Cleveland traded for him, he'd have been starting in the next game. And so I guess that's my take. And I know the Browns are, and I said it too, the Browns are awful. It's incredible how bad this franchise is. And they got a GM they brought in from baseball who's nothing but an analytics guy that goes home at 5 o'clock every afternoon. I mean, that's not how you're going to win in the NFL. But I just would have liked to have seen him get an opportunity to start. And I hope it works out after this season that he gets that. I'm not sure he will, Mike. That's kind of my hesitation with waiting to see what happens. And as I said, the clock's ticking on him. He redshirted. He was 19 years old when he graduated high school. He'll be 28 next September, Mike. I mean, it's got to happen. You've seen this before, whether it's Brian Hoyer or some guys get typecast as a backup quarterback and they can never break out of that shell.
Yeah, I mean, and by the way, that's not necessarily a bad thing when you talk about, career longevity, being able to hang around in the background. And, I've seen it happen for a couple of different guys. I played with Chris Redmond, who was in the NFL. I mean, he was selling insurance in the middle of his career and able to make it back to the Falcons, at different times with Bobby Petrino. And so I understand what you're saying. Nothing's guaranteed. You'd love to see him get on the field. But I just look at, all the Browns starters that they've had. And, I really do. I view it as a place where quarterbacks go to die. You can say that maybe their quarterbacks have been bad. But I think after, 15, 20 quarterbacks, you have to look at franchise in the mirror and say, maybe this just isn't a good place for quarterbacks. And so I think that he'll get an opportunity. I think that there's too many spots in the NFL right now that kind of have, their hands up in the air as far as quarterbacks go. I mean, if a guy like Brock Osweiler is getting paid $70 million and Jimmy Garoppolo is getting traded from the Patriots and Ryan Mallett's got his chance and all these other backup quarterbacks, I don't see why A.J. McCarron won't get his as well. And, maybe it is in Cincinnati. Maybe they get to the end of the season and decide they need him to stay on board and be their starting quarterback. So I'm definitely rooting for him. I think he's got all the ability in the world. I think he's got the ability to be a starting quarterback and the middle makeup to be a starting quarterback in the NFL. But I'm telling you, I'm glad it's not in Cincinnati. I think that his career would have only been a couple more years had he gone there. And, possibly he can get some longevity out of going somewhere else. Oh,
man, I tell you, the way the Browns are viewed, I can't argue with you based on their track record with quarterbacks and their track record now. And as I said right now, they're a mess now. Now, the one thing I can't figure out, as much money as Jimmy Haslam has, you just think he could find a way to figure it out. But I'm not an analytics guy. I don't mind using it, but at the end of the day, it's about people. And, I've just heard some horror stories about the Browns. Still, I wanted to see AJ. I guess, again, it's just the bias factor. I wanted to see him get a chance to play. And you said something about Cincinnati and Marvin Lewis is the head coach, and he's married to Andy Dalton. And as long as Dalton and he are together, he's going to be the starter. But you look at that team and you look at what AJ did a couple years ago when he did get a chance to start. And, if I were the Bengals, I'd be looking at some other alternatives, but they're not. Hey, man, I've rambled on enough. This is your segment. I've just about stolen all your thunder. I've been on a roll today. So
that was good, man. I enjoyed the Charlie's Angels and the Love Boat talk earlier.
Good to have you, Mike. Thanks a lot.
All right, man. Roll Tide.